Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you yet again. Hope you're doing well. It's September, and we're getting ready and excited to go to Pod Summit, which is going to be in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. It's going to be the end of September, and I'm get to see my buddy Scarlett, which will be fun, and excited to meet a bunch of other podcasters from around Canada, maybe a little bit from the US. If you're thinking of coming, podsummit.com is the place to go if you can come. If you live in Calgary, then just come. Just you should be there. So as I look at over the listenership for the How to Podcast series, a lot of US listeners, and we love you all. The Canadians, though, this is a podcast summit for you. And if you're thinking about having a podcast and you're not really sure, am I allowed to come to this event if I don't have a show, but I'm thinking about starting, then you need to come to Pod Summit, podsummit.com, link in the show notes, as always. And I would love to see you there. And if you're going to be there, then leave me a message at howtopodcast.ca on my SpeakPipe and let me know so we can meet up. Maybe we can have coffee or whatever and just to get to see you in person. So I'd love to meet you there. My wife Jennifer is coming with me. Big news. The last time we went away for a trip together, just the two of us, was our honeymoon 31 years ago. Yeah. So, and this is going to be the first time my wife and I have been together on a plane at the same time. We have traveled separately, but we've never traveled together on a plane. We've always driven everywhere, and now we're actually going to take our traveling to new heights and take a plane together. And the only request my wife had, Jen is adamant that she gets the window seat, which is where I like to sit. But hey, it's fun. So I get to sit in the middle and have no armrests for the entire flight, which will be fun. It's expensive to fly. Holy cow. But we're going to have a great time. We're going to make the best of it and get every penny out of this experience together. And again, if you're going to be there, I'd love to see you. In this episode of the How to Podcast series, I want to talk about telling good stories, how to tell better stories, and stories that resonate, stories that really connect with your audience and help you to build a listenership where people love to hear your stories, and how you can master the art of storytelling in your podcast. That's really the idea for this episode. We're going to be running through a few things, and it's all based on a quote from one of the movies I like. In that movie, there's a famous line, "Those aren't pillows." And the other line that really caught my attention is this one around how telling a story should be. And it kind of sets the tone for our discussion here. Here you go. Here's a little clip from the movie.
And by the way, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
Well, yeah, right there. That's it from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Yeah, but the whole idea about telling a story is you got to have a point to what you're saying. Otherwise, what's there for the listener? At the end of the day, at the end of the episode, you want the listener to walk away with something. And I think that storytelling is an art that we as podcasters can do better at through practice, through research, through just trying to do this more, be more conscious of it as we go through our podcast recording. How can I take these points and turn them into a story that connects with the person that's listening? I think it helps your content to sit better with your audience. They get more out of it because you have framed it within a story context. And I think it really does help you to build a really engaged audience for your show. So that's my idea today, is I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can incorporate better storytelling and some key things. So we're going to look at, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 different things to consider as we go through and help you build a better storyboard and plan for your podcast. Are you ready? Okay. First one is just to craft a compelling narrative structure for your podcast. And what does that mean? Think about the last time you saw a James Bond movie, 007. When you hit play on the movie, or you sit down in the theater and you got your popcorn and the scene comes up, the movie starts. What do? Are they doing the James Bond 007 LinkedIn bio, where they talk about where he went to school and blah, 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 and all these things and all of his achievements and all the things he's done? It's very traditional in podcasting to start like that, especially when you have a guest. You're reading off all the places they've been to school, and it really, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to set the stage that this person's important. Remember, though, as a listener of your show, I already enjoy you as a host, and you don't need to convince me that your guest is great because you're the host and I trust you. So you could bring on anybody as long as they bring value to the audience. I'm really not going to question your choice and why this person's on your show. I really don't need their LinkedIn bio. Have a link to it in the show notes. I'll go check it out myself. Let's just get to the story. When you go to a James Bond movie, again, they don't start out with the whole backstory about how James Bond became James Bond. And they put you in the passenger seat of a car chase, and there's bullets whizzing by the window. There's a cliff. There's an ocean down below and a mountain. You're in the action the moment the movie starts. Like there's no chance to catch your breath. It's like you jumped on the roller coaster and immediately down the big steep hill right away. There's no warm up. It's just, you're in it. And I think that when we create stories in our podcast, they can be that moment where we take somebody from, I don't know your guest, I don't know the topic and what you're talking about, straight into the story, straight into the podcast, straight into the content. So start with a strong hook. And that's what James Bond movies do really well, a really strong hook that brings you in, grabs your attention, gets you to sit down and think about the fact that you're listening to the show. Instead of kind of doing this meandering conversation that leads to an eventual podcast, as quick as you can, get into the subject. And that's something that we need to practice and do better at. So if you spend 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe try cutting any of those in half on your next episode and see if you can get to the content sooner. And if you can start off with a story, even better, because now you have people listening and they're identifying with you in the topic. Develop a clear beginning, middle, and end to any story that you tell. A story should not meander. I'm helping somebody with their podcast right now, and we're really kind of working through taking a big idea and kind of distilling it down to the very basics, something that's easy to say, easy to repeat, easy to remember. Instead of this big, lofty vision for the podcast and why we're here, we're trying to get it down to a sentence or two, down to even like 2 or 3 words that really crystal clear are why this podcast exists in the world. And I think that's one thing we really need to do is develop a really clear beginning, middle, and end to any story that you have. It really does help your listener to follow along on the story. Also, the one thing we can do is we can build tension and conflict to help keep our content listeners, our podcast listeners, interested in and invested in what we're doing. And always end with a satisfying resolution or some kind of call to action. And I like the term pathway to action, but something that leads people to something, to a discovery, to a resolution, to a change of mind, maybe a question that makes them question their own thoughts and beliefs or their path in life. Something that takes them through these steps to a call to action or a pathway to action. The next thing is we need to make our stories more relatable and more personal. Whenever you can in your stories, try to use characters or situations that your audience can easily identify and relate to. Nothing that's super big and, okay, so like for example, isn't it terrible when your private jet, is grounded and you have to take commercial flights with all the other people? Isn't that terrible? Okay, well, there's a small majority of your audience that might agree with that or have ever experienced that. For the most part, nobody's relating to that story. So it's very hard for me to connect with that because I don't know what it's like to have a private jet. So that's not really relatable to the majority of your audience, unless your audience are all Mark Cubans and Elon Musk listeners. I don't think a lot of people are going to have and identify with that struggle. Share authentic personal experiences and struggles that you've had. Something that you haven't read online, but something you've experienced. And then tap into these universal emotions and themes that bring all of the audience in, even if they haven't experienced exactly what you have. Somehow tie it back to them so they feel included in your story. It could be anything. My wife and I right now are renovating a house, and I have paint on my hands. We've done flooring and bathrooms, and the electrician's been there, the plumber's been there. We've just been working crazy hours while still doing life and working in our jobs. And having to do this is just, it's crazy. So, but you might not be renovating a house right now or have never done that. But have you ever had a time when you've been so busy that you feel like you haven't had time for yourself? And you just feel like you go from one task to the next task to the next task? That could be as a parent, that could be in your job, that could be in your relationships, that could be with your children, right? You can relate to that part when you may not relate to the fact of renovating a house while working, right? So tie it in as best as you can to the audience so that somebody feels they can put themselves into your story. Make it relatable and make it personal. And the other thing you could do is to try to use some sort of vivid sensory detail. Now, I know when my kids were little, I would say to them, they would be frustrated. They were trying to do something. They were getting upset. They were whatever. I would tell them when they were little, use your words. Tell me what you want. Like, what's going on? Like, why are you acting like this? Just use your words. Then I can help you. And it could be they're hungry or they're tired or they want that toy. I just want them to use the words. And so I would encourage you to use your words and use descriptive language that engages with the senses. Okay? A smell, a taste, a feeling, light breeze on your forehead as you walk along the beach, the smell of fresh baked cookies, the smell after lightning has just gone off outside and you hear the crickets as well. Like, those are things that put people into the story and make them feel like they're there in their own world. And it gives them a chance to participate in the story themselves. So use any kind of descriptive language you can come up with and try to paint a picture in the viewer's mind with very specific details. Time, place, those kind of things. Help people to really connect with your story. And anytime you can use an analogy or a metaphor to explain complex ideas, that's great. Because now they have this little thing that they can use around the water cooler with their partner, with their kids, with their friends. They can take what you've shared and they can then share it from their perspective to their audience, to their community and their family. So you're giving them the tools to sound super smart. When they're at that party or whatever, they can take your story and put it in their context and share it. Use vivid sensory details. It really helps to land and ground the listener to your podcast into the story. And the next thing, just focus on your core message. Like we heard before in that clip, a good story has a point. And you want to make sure that you focus on your core message. Have a clear takeaway or a main idea that you want to convey to your audience with your stories. Try to weave in your key points naturally throughout the story and then tie everything back to the original theme, the central idea of your story. And if you don't have a reason or a good rationale for the story you want to tell, then maybe don't tell that story. Everything in your podcast should lead back to the final result of your mission for that episode, your mission for the podcast. Telling a story just to tell a story, unless it's a storytelling podcast, really doesn't serve your audience. Your story should be grounded in the theme and the episode so that it feeds the story. Okay? Think about how your story builds into the episode so that people walk away with a connection between your story and the big idea. If there's no connection, just leave it out. There's no reason to keep it in there. So think about that. And as well, we need to engage multiple senses when we're doing our storytelling in our podcast. For those that love to do video alongside of your podcast, whether it's a part of your podcast or it's adjacent to your podcast, any type of video content or anything like that can reinforce your podcast. That's one thing you can do. Complement your verbal storytelling with visuals wherever you can. It could even be in the artwork for your episode, which is something you can do. You can use music. You can use sound effects, or you can use different ways to do your voice or do different voices or have other voices on your show. And try to incorporate interactive elements wherever you can, wherever possible. And it's nice when we can hear a different voice on the show So anytime you can leverage things like SpeakPipe, which we talk about quite often, anytime you can bring in another voice into your show, it does help for your listeners to connect with not only your voice, but also the voice of those along with you on your show. Anytime you can leverage multiple senses, the better. Okay, and in an audio format, it's a little harder to do, but that's when the theater of the mind comes in, and painting a picture for your audience really helps them to get deeper into the story, and a story sells, everyone. A story sells, so make sure you do this in your show and in your podcast. And then the last part just comes down to practicing and refining your storytelling abilities. I can tell you that when I went bowling for the first time, I sucked at bowling. I couldn't do it. It was terrible. It took practice, and now I'm an averagely, mildly good bowler. Enough to not be embarrassed, but not enough to win an award by any means. But it's fun sometimes just to get out there and see how bad I can mess up and try not to embarrass myself too much. But by practicing and working on my game in bowling, I do see improvement. And if I did it more often, I would probably get better. But wearing someone else's shoes and, it's not really my thing for bowling. So I don't do it very often. But if I did it more, I'd probably be better at it. Same with storytelling. The more you do this, the more you can get better at it. The more your audience is going to see your improvement. You need to study storytelling techniques from books and courses, other creators around this space. And then as well, the one thing I tell everybody is to record yourself and analyze your delivery. Like, are you connecting with the audience? Do you feel human in the moment? Are you really focused on the listener? Are you focused on yourself? Are you reading a script? And then get feedback from others and try to continually improve your storytelling abilities. These are things that you can do. And if you ever want to have a conversation about your show and you want to get some feedback, especially if you're launching your show and you want to know if it's good or if there's anything we can do better, if you're ever looking for a listening ear to come alongside of you and help you out with that, I'd love to help you. Over at howtopodcast.ca, jump in my calendar right off the website and let's talk. Let's work on your show together, and I can give you some ideas on maybe how you can launch it a great way or continue growing your show. Happy to help. And if you just want to work on storytelling, we can do that together as well. By focusing on these storytelling elements, by having a story with a point, which apparently is a good idea, content creators can be more effective and draw in their audience in better. It'll help you to connect emotionally with your content and for your audience to absorb the main idea that you're presenting in your show. And the key in all of this in storytelling is to make your story relatable, engaging, and memorable, while always keeping your core message at the forefront. Always remembering, this is why this story is here, this is how it brings value, and this is what I want my audience to walk away with because of this story. Stories are not just an add-on ingredient that you just kind of toss in and hope it helps. Stories need to be intentional. They have to have a reason, a purpose, and it should connect with your audience. So I want you to tell more stories. If you're not a storyteller by trade, you're like, not really good at this. I challenge you to add one new story to your next episode. Something that you put effort into, time into, and if it's a personal story, even better. Something from your life, something you've experienced, something you've seen, because there's one thing that can't be duplicated is you. And your story can't be duplicated because it happened to you. It didn't happen to AI, and it didn't happen to the other podcaster who podcasts like you do about your topic. It happened to you, and nobody can copy that. So that's your winning ingredient for your next episode is you. A little bit more of you. And I would really encourage you to think about how you can add a great story. And send me a link to your episode where you tell a new story or you put this into practice. I want to listen to that episode. I would love to hear your show and hear how you added stories into your podcast. And if you want to tell better stories, reach out to me, howtopodcast.ca. I've got some resources, some books, some tools that you could use that'll help you grow. beyond listening to this podcast, and I'd love to share them with you over at howtopodcast.ca. Thanks for listening. Take care. Get out there, tell better stories, and make sure your stories have a point. Thanks for listening. Keep podcasting. Hey, thanks for being here at the end of the podcast. This is just for you because you're still here. Thank you for your support for the podcast. Thank you for listening to the show, sharing it with other podcasters. Maybe somebody you know is thinking about starting a show. I would love for you to say, hey, wait. You should go check out the How to Podcast series. It's got everything you need. And Dave as well is included. You get one free Dave with the How to Podcast series. I'm included with it. So kind of a bundle thing you get. To that point, mentioning it in the podcast, definitely want to remind you here at the end. There's a link in the show notes. Starting it this summer, I'm working through this. It's a way for us, you and I, to have a conversation around podcasting. I want to help you. And I've been doing this for people who listen to the show now for almost 3 years. And I just haven't been promoting it as a thing. So I'm now promoting it as a thing. I want to spend time with you. I kind of would love to hear your voice. We're going to jump on Zoom together. We're going to talk about your podcast. You get time one-on-one with me, 30 minutes in my calendar, completely free, no strings attached. You don't have to buy a blender or a vacuum or none of that stuff. No. You just us. I just like to help you. And whether you're thinking about starting a show or you have a show, you want to grow your show, whatever it is, I'd love to meet you, talk about your struggles, your questions, work together. And I am eventually developing this into more of a coaching program for podcasters. But I'm starting with my best friends first, for free. So if you're interested, you listen to the show, and I appreciate you. Link in the show notes. Let's get together and talk podcasting, okay? You and me. Let's talk. Let's talk soon. See you. Thanks.